The night I found out I couldn't breathe. Not a dramatic, gasping kind of breathless. Not the kind you see in movies where someone clutches their chest and falls against a wall. It was quieter than that, slower. Like someone had reached inside my chest, wrapped their hand around my lungs, and just held them still. I stood in my kitchen, under that same yellow light I had stood under for 30 years, and I could not move. There was a cup of tea on the counter. Still warm. I had just made it. I remember staring at the steam rising off it and thinking how strange it was that something so ordinary could exist in the same moment as something so completely devastating. The world doesn't stop for your pain. It never does. The tea just keeps steaming. The clock just keeps ticking. And you just stand there trying to remember how to be a person. I want you to understand something before I tell you the rest of this story. What happened to me wasn't just about money. It wasn't just about property or paperwork or fraud. It was about a person I had carried inside my body. A person I had stayed up all night with when he had fevers. A person I had sacrificed years of my own life for, without a second thought, because that is what mothers do. And that person had looked me in the eye every single day while quietly dismantling everything I had built. The worst part wasn't discovering the betrayal. The worst part was realizing how long it had been happening. Months. Maybe longer. While I was making dinner. While I was watching television in the next room. While I was sleeping in my own bed, a few walls away, trusting completely. That closeness, that ordinary domestic closeness, made it feel like a violation in a way I still struggle to describe. And then there was Sarah, my daughter. My youngest, the one who had never in her entire life given me a single moment of worry. The one who checked on me twice a week, who remembered my doctor's appointments, who left little notes on my fridge just to make me smile. She was sitting in a police station, in handcuffs, accused of the very crimes that had been committed against us both. When I say I went numb, I don't mean I felt nothing. I mean I felt everything at once, so loudly, that my body had no choice but to go silent. It was the only way to survive the volume of it. People talk about betrayal like it's a single moment, a door slam and a phone call, a discovery. But real betrayal is not a moment. It is a slow unraveling. It is looking back at every small thing, every conversation, every smile, every favor, and seeing it differently now. Seeing the calculation behind it. That is what breaks you. Not the moment you find out, but every quiet moment after when your memory becomes the enemy. I didn't cry that night. I have thought about that many times since. Why didn't I cry? I think because crying requires you to believe that something has ended. And I couldn't believe it. Not yet. Some part of me was still standing in the doorway of his childhood bedroom, watching him sleep, thinking he was just a boy who needed his mother. But there was something else that night. Something I didn't know yet. Something small and forgotten and covered in dust, sitting on a shelf in the hallway. A camera. My late husband's old security camera, still blinking, still recording, still quietly doing its job long after everyone had forgotten it was there. I didn't know it yet. But the truth was already waiting for me. It had been waiting for months. Patient and silent and absolutely certain, the way truth always is when nobody is looking for it yet. My name is Margaret. Most people who know me, really know me, call me Maggie. I am 62 years old, and I have the hands to prove it. Rough at the knuckles, always a little dry no matter how much lotion I use. Hands that have washed dishes, folded laundry, signed school permission slips, and gripped a factory floor railing at 6 a.m. when the cold made everything ache. I never minded those hands. They told the truth about who I was, and I have always respected people who tell the truth. I grew up in a small town where nobody had very much, so nobody thought too much about not having it. My parents worked. We ate. We were grateful. That was the whole philosophy of the household, and it settled into me early and stayed. I never wanted luxury. I never even understood luxury, not really. What I wanted was something solid, something that was mine and couldn't be taken. A roof, a garden, a door I could close at the end of a long day and breathe easy behind. I met Robert when I was 23. He was quiet in the way that steady men are quiet, not because they have nothing to say, but because they think before they speak. We got married within a year, not because we were in a rush, but because we already knew. Some things you just know. Daniel came first, loud from the very beginning, full of energy, always moving, always talking, always the center of whatever room he walked into. People loved being around him. He had that quality. That magnetic, impossible to pin down quality, where you just felt good when he smiled at you. I loved that about him. I was proud of it. I thought it meant he would go far. I never once considered that charm, untethered from conscience, is one of the most dangerous things a person can carry. Sarah came 3 years later, and she was his opposite in almost every way. Where Daniel filled silence, Sarah lived in it. She was the kind of child who noticed things. A neighbor's sad face, a wilting plant, a bird sitting funny on a fence post. She would bring these observations to me quietly, like small gifts. Mama, Mrs. Henderson looked lonely today. Mama, the roses need water. She paid attention to the world in a way that most people never do, and it made her uncommonly kind. Robert died when Daniel was 19 and Sarah was 16, a sudden thing. The kind of loss that doesn't announce itself, doesn't give you time to prepare, just arrives one morning and rearranges everything permanently. I don't talk about it much even now. Some grief doesn't shrink with time, it just changes shape. After Robert passed, I worked double shifts at the textile factory for almost 6 years. I want you to understand what that means. I want you to feel it, not just read it. It means leaving before sunrise. It means coming home after dark, eating standing at the counter because you're too tired to sit properly, and then doing it all again the next morning. It means missing things. School plays, parent evenings, dinners. Little ordinary moments that pile up into something you can never get back. But I did it because there were 2 children who needed stability more than they needed a present mother, and I made peace with that trade, off the only way I knew how, by never stopping, never complaining, and never letting them see how exhausted I was. By the time I was 50, I had saved enough to buy the house outright and a small piece of land beside it. It wasn't grand. It was modest and a little crooked, and the back fence leaned in the wind. But I had earned every nail in every wall, and when I stood in that kitchen for the first time and looked around at what 40 years of hard work had built, I felt something I can only describe as whole. That feeling lasted a long time, right up until the moment my own son came back through the front door with a smile on his face and something else entirely in his heart. He came back on a Tuesday. I remember because I had just finished hanging laundry on the line, and the afternoon light was doing that thing it does in autumn. Low and golden and making everything look warmer than it is. I heard a car in the driveway and looked up, and there was Daniel. Bigger than I remembered, dressed well. That wide smile stretched across his face like he had never been gone a day. I dropped the laundry basket and walked toward him, and he hugged me the way sons hug mothers when they know they've been away too long. Strong. A little guilty. I held on for a moment longer than I should have because I had missed him more than I had let myself admit. "I'm back, Mom," he said into my hair. "I want to be closer to family." And I believed every single word. That is the thing about people who are very good at deception. They don't lie constantly. That would be exhausting and detectable. Instead, they tell you enough truth to build your trust, and then they use that trust like a key. Daniel was exceptional at this. Every kindness he showed me in those early weeks was real enough to feel genuine. That's what made it so effective. He fixed the back fence that had been leaning for 2 years. He drove me to my Thursday doctor's appointment without being asked. He cooked a lamb stew one Sunday that smelled exactly like the one his father used to make, and we sat at the kitchen table together, and I actually thought, that something broken had been quietly repaired. That our family, reduced and rearranged by loss, had found its way back to something resembling whole. A few weeks in, he offered to help with the paperwork. He said it casually, the way you offer to carry someone's groceries. "Mom, your eyes are giving you trouble. Let me handle the bank statements, the property documents, all of that. It's the least I can do." I hesitated for exactly one moment, then I said yes, because he was my son, because I was tired, because trusting your child is not a weakness. It is one of the most natural things a human being can do. I handed him the folder, the one with the property deeds, the account numbers, the signature stamp Robert had made for me years ago when my arthritis made writing difficult. I handed him all of it and went to make tea, and I did not think twice about it, and I will carry that moment with me for the rest of my life. The bank calls started about 4 months later. Automated at first, then a real voice, polite but firm, asking me to come in and discuss some irregularities on my account. I told Daniel about it, and he frowned and said he would look into it. He looked into it. He told me it was a clerical error. I believed him, again. Then Sandra knocked on my door, my neighbor of 14 years, standing on my porch with a piece of paper in her hand and an expression on her face that I will never forget. She looked like a person who had rehearsed what to say and then forgotten all of it the moment I opened the door. She held out the paper. A property transfer document, legal, stamp, dated 4 months earlier. My land, my house, transferred in full into Daniel's name, signed with my signature. I read it 3 times, then a 4th, not because I didn't understand it, but because my mind kept refusing to accept what my eyes were clearly reading. I stood there in the doorway with the afternoon light going dim around me, and I thought about the folder I had handed him. The signature stamp, the trust I had passed across the kitchen table like it was nothing, like it was safe. And then Daniel's voice came back to me, smooth and certain and completely without shame, saying the words he would say to my face just hours later, words I was not yet prepared for, words that would take everything I had left and aim it directly at my daughter. The first night after Sarah was arrested, I sat on the edge of my bed and stared at the wall until the room went from dark to gray to the pale, indifferent light of early morning. I never slept, not because I was crying, though I did cry eventually in that ugly, soundless way that happens when you've held something too long. But mostly I just sat there, thinking about her face when they put the handcuffs on. The way she looked at me, not with panic, with something quieter than panic, confusion. The pure, bewildered confusion of a person who has done nothing wrong and cannot understand why the world is treating them as if they have. That look stayed with me every single day of those weeks. I saw it when I closed my eyes. I saw it when I tried to eat. I saw it in the middle of ordinary moments, washing a cup, opening a curtain, and it would hit me fresh each time, like the first time, like a door swinging open into cold air. Grief is strange when it comes alongside injustice. Ordinary grief asks you to accept and eventually let go. But this kind, the kind soaked in wrongness, in someone else's deliberate cruelty, doesn't ask you to let go. It asks you to fight. And fighting when you have no money, no proof, and no strength is one of the loneliest feelings I have ever known. I borrowed $900 from my friend Louise to hire a lawyer. His name was Gerald. Small office, stacks of files everywhere, a coffee mug with a chip on the rim that he never seemed to notice. He was honest with me from the first meeting, which I respected even as it devastated me. He said the case against Sarah was carefully constructed. The paper trail was clean. The notary stamps were legitimate. The witness statements were consistent. Whoever had built this frame had taken their time and done it properly. Without physical counter-evidence, he said, we were swimming uphill. I went home after that meeting and sat in Robert's old armchair and did not move for a very long time. The house felt different those days. Smaller somehow, like the walls had shifted inward. I had always thought of it as a safe place. The thing I had worked decades to build, the shelter that was supposed to protect the people I loved. Now it felt like it had already been taken. Like I was just living inside someone else's property waiting to be asked to leave. People in town started to talk. I heard things secondhand the way you always do in small places. That Sarah had always been strange and quiet. That there must have been problems in the family for years. One woman, someone I had known since my children were small, stopped returning my greetings at the post office. Just looked through me like I had become invisible. That hurt in a specific, sharp way that I wasn't prepared for. Loneliness from strangers is bearable. Loneliness from people who once knew your name is something else entirely. I stopped sleeping properly. I stopped eating at regular times. I would find myself standing in the kitchen at 2 a.m, not hungry, not thirsty, just standing there because sitting felt too much like giving up and lying down felt too much like surrender. My body was exhausted in a way that sleep couldn't fix, because the exhaustion wasn't physical. It was the weight of helplessness, of knowing that something terribly wrong was happening to someone you love and being unable to stop it. I prayed. I am not an especially religious woman, but I prayed the way desperate people pray, not with ceremony or the right words, but with raw, unpolished need. I talked to Robert too out loud, alone in the house, feeling equal parts foolish and completely certain that somewhere he could hear me. I told him what had happened. I told him about Sarah. I told him I didn't know what to do. And then I looked up from that armchair, the way you look up when a conversation goes quiet, and through the doorway into the hall I saw something I had walked past 100 times without ever truly seeing. A small black shape on the shelf, blinking slowly in the dark, so familiar it had become invisible, so forgotten it had become irrelevant, until the moment it suddenly, completely was not. I don't know how long I sat there staring at it. Time had stopped working properly in those weeks. Minutes felt like hours and whole days disappeared without leaving any impression at all, but I remember the exact quality of the silence in that hallway. The kind of silence that a house makes at 2 a.m. when it is completely, absolutely alone. And in the middle of that silence, that small black camera just blinked, slow and steady, like a heartbeat that had never stopped. Robert had installed it years ago, back when there had been a string of break-ins in the neighborhood. He was methodical about things like that. Safety, preparation, thinking 3 steps ahead. He mounted it high on the hallway shelf, angled to cover the front door and the writing desk beside the window. We used it for a few months, checked the footage occasionally, found nothing alarming, and then simply forgot it existed. Life moves forward and things become furniture. The camera became part of the shelf the same way the shelf became part of the wall. Present, unnoticed, irrelevant, until it wasn't. Until I was sitting in my dead husband's armchair at 2 a.m. with nothing left to lose and nowhere else to look, and it blinked at me from the hallway like it had been waiting patiently for exactly this moment. Like it had always known its purpose. Like Robert had known too, in some way that defies explanation, when he pressed it into that particular corner of our particular home all those years ago. My hands were shaking when I climbed up on the step stool to reach it. My knees weren't much better. I unclipped it from its mount and carried it to the kitchen table under the yellow light and sat down with it the way you sit down with something fragile. I found the cable in the drawer where we had always kept it, still there, still coiled, undisturbed through all the years of forgetting. I plugged it into my old laptop and waited while it loaded and told myself very firmly not to hope too hard, because I had been disappointed enough recently that hope had started to feel dangerous. The footage library went back further than I expected. Years of motion triggered clips. Most of it was exactly what you would imagine: me crossing the hallway, the cat moving through a patch of sunlight, shadows shifting as clouds passed the window. I scrolled through slowly, not entirely sure what I was looking for, guided by nothing more than the specific dread that had settled in my chest the moment I remembered the writing desk was in the camera's frame. The writing desk where I kept the folders, where I kept the stamp. I almost missed it. The timestamp read 2047 in the morning, and the clip was short, and the thumbnail looked like nothing, just a dim room with a small moving light. But something made me stop, something quiet and instinctive and impossible to name. I clicked on it. I leaned forward. And there was my son. He had brought his own lamp. That detail hit me strangely harder than almost anything else. Not the overhead light, which would have bled under my bedroom door. His own small lamp, carried in deliberately, thought about in advance. This was not impulsive. This was not desperation. This was a man who had planned, prepared, and rehearsed. He moved through the room like someone who had been there before in his mind 100 times already. He opened the folder. He laid out the documents in a specific order. He uncapped the signature stamp with one smooth motion and pressed it down without any hesitation whatsoever. He did not look around nervously. He did not pause. He worked with the calm, focused efficiency of someone who believed completely that he would never be caught. And when he was finished, he put everything back exactly as it had been. Every paper, every pen, the folder itself, and he turned off his little lamp and walked back down the hallway and disappeared into the dark. I watched it twice. Then a third time. Then I sat back in my chair and looked at the ceiling and let out a breath that felt like it had been trapped inside me for months. My hands were still shaking, but something had changed inside them. They weren't shaking from fear anymore. They were shaking from the specific, overwhelming feeling of a person who has been walking through darkness for a very long time and has just finally seen the light switch on the wall. I reached for my phone. I found Gerald's number, and for the first time in weeks my voice came out steady.